Mark Rogers TV on college football, and there's very few times that any of us really wish for somebody to get fired. It's usually not a time of celebration, unless that someone is losing football games or whatever the sport for our favorite team. So for those of you out there who have been chanting fire Kiffin in recent weeks, you got your wish. USC head coach Lane Kiffin fired by athletic director Pat Haden just a few hours after another dismal performance by the Trojans, this time on defense, in losing at Arizona State 62-41, tied for the most points given up in USC history. And they've been playing football for quite a long time there at USC. A storied tradition. You just can't play football and display the embarrassment that they have primarily on offense this season. So here's the situation with Lane Kiffin. I see the good, I see the bad. I have no emotional investment, and certainly when I get done, USC fans in particular, college football fans in general, would love to hear what you have to say about Kiffin's tenure at USC, what USC should do going forward, who they should hire, and does Lane Kiffin have a place in college football? I can guess what most of the responses are going to be to that question. So Lane Kiffin comes into a difficult situation in Los Angeles where Pete Carroll ran off to the NFL in Seattle and left NCAA sanctions at USC. Lane Kiffin, after 2 seasons, apparently had weathered the storm. 8-5 his first season, then that really good run in 2011, 10-2. And by the end of that season, it looked like USC was one of the top 5 teams in the country. They had the explosive offense with Matt Barkley and Marquise and Robert Woods. The defense was coming along. Sure, there were scholarship reductions in place that would take effect and impact this program for years to come. But we know USC. We know the tradition. We know the location. We know the recruiting base. We know the facilities, the money, the resources. They can pretty much pick and choose the talent across the country. Kids love going to USC. Pete Carroll accomplished great things there by really taking advantage of the location and all the things we just mentioned. And it looked like Lane Kiffin was doing the same thing, bringing in top recruits. And USC coming off that 10-2 season in 2011, preseason number 1. Myself and a lot of others certainly thought that was a bit premature, but I certainly thought this was a top 10 team. They had the explosiveness on offense, had top talent on the front line on defense, but depth would be a concern. Okay, it didn't go that way for USC last season. Matt Barkley had a poor season. They had offensive line issues protecting Barkley. They lost 6 games, and it wasn't just going 7-6, becoming the only team in the history of college football to lose that many games after starting out the season number 1, but it was the way they lost. And it was certainly culminated by the performance in the Sun Bowl in El Paso, Texas. Now, when you play at USC or Michigan or Ohio State or Alabama, you don't envision your season, especially when you're preseason number 1, ending in El Paso, Texas on New Year's Eve, where it's like 38 degrees and 32,000 people are watching the game. At the same time, USC was embarrassed in that game by Georgia Tech, a team that lost 7 games. And USC was simply embarrassed. They did not display themselves as a team that worked hard, played hard, and again, embarrassed in that football game because of the effort or lack thereof. They didn't want to show up. They didn't want to play. They didn't want to practice. They missed events leading up to the bowl game that are tied to the bowl game, and you need to show up and show enough class to show up and do your thing and go through the practices and play hard and go to the meetings and go to the events and the functions. And that's the head coach's responsibility. And then it showed on the field. They just didn't want to be there, and they lost 21-7. So they finish up that season at 7-6. They come into this season, and there's a quarterback controversy. Barkley moves on to the NFL, and Lane Kiffin actually has a good problem in that he's got talented quarterbacks. He's got Max Browne, the incoming freshman, probably not going to start, but he was in the competition early. But most notably, you've got Max Wittek, who mopped up for Matt Barkley last season against Notre Dame and in the bowl game, and also Cody Kessler. and Lane Kiffin can't decide who should the quarterback be. And it's not necessarily that it cost USC early in the season. None of us will know that because they did win their first couple games. But it just seemed like he could not make a decision. He couldn't go forward, and the football team could not go forward because of that. And the offense has suffered. The offense has been dismal this entire season. And it's kind of ironic that they open it up for 41 points against Arizona State just a couple hours before Kiffin gets the axe. 41 points against Arizona State, but other than that, again, dismal. 14 points or 17 points against Utah State. It all kind of capsulized in that Washington State effort at home where they lost 10-7 to Washington State, who was just clubbed by Stanford last night. And that was embarrassing to lose to Washington State and not be able to put points on the board. Lose at home, hear those chants of fire Kiffin, fire Kiffin. It just wasn't a good scene. And talk about not a good scene, that's been the scene at the LA Coliseum this season. Small crowds, two of the smallest crowds in the history of modern day USC football showing up to the games against Boston College and Utah State, the Washington State game as well. Small crowds, half-filled LA Coliseum. That's not good. As a head coach, it obviously all comes down to winning, but if you can't fill the seats, and my next point is if you can't beat your crosstown rival or your cross-state or intrastate or out-of-state rival, whoever that is, and for USC, that's UCLA, and UCLA is a hot, chic, sexy program right now under Jim Mora, and I'm sure that doesn't sit well with USC fans. UCLA has been beaten down by USC for years, and UCLA is now an up-and-coming program and gaining recruits and stealing territory from USC. And for the first time in many years, this past recruiting season ranked higher than USC in the recruiting rankings, and Jim Mora has got it going. So you lose football games after being preseason number one. It's basically gone downhill for USC since then. Lost football games in an embarrassing way, lose recruiting territory, become second fiddle in your town. It's just not good, and it's not looking good for Lane Kiffin. But again, he came into a difficult situation, got off to a good start, but it came crumbling down. He lost this football team, and they just didn't show up when they didn't want to show up. And again, that was capitalized by that Sun Bowl effort. 3-2 this season, 2 losses in the Pac-12. And to go to Arizona State and lose is one thing. To be embarrassed by 21 points and to give up 62 points to Arizona State, who's a decent team, a fringe top 25 team, but not a great team. And if you're giving up 62 to Arizona State, they're not exactly Georgia, Clemson, or Texas A&M on offense. That's pretty bad. The other thing is, again, it's ironic that they get clubbed by Arizona State and give up all those points because actually the defense has looked proud and shown up for these football games up until Game 5 against Arizona State. What's next for USC? They've got the resources, the location, the tradition, the money, the facilities to go out and get just about anybody they want. So USC fans, I'm asking you, be reasonable here. It's not going to be Nick Saban or Urban Meyer. Who do you want as the next head coach? You've got 11 days to prepare for your next football game. Ed Orgeron, the former Ole Miss coach, takes over for the rest of the season. He's got a difficult task of taking over a team that has to be very much in dismay, beaten down, lacking confidence, not knowing direction right now, not knowing what to do. Should I play and protect myself against injury and hopefully make it to the NFL? Am I really going to play hard? Is this really worth it? We're out of the Pac-12 race seemingly at this point anyway. So still hurting from NCAA sanctions as well. So the talent is there in spots, but it's very thin. And I'm sure it didn't help Lane Kiffin's cause looking way east out to Pennsylvania to see what Bill O'Brien's accomplishing at Penn State. With sanctions and difficulties and challenges that far outweigh anything Lane Kiffin has faced at USC, Bill O'Brien went 8-4 last season with class and dignity, and his team is playing its hearts out. It's not a great football team, but considering the situation, Penn State has seemingly weathered the storm, and Bill O'Brien's off to a great start there and has shown up his football program to have a future and have some hope, and he's recruiting well despite the circumstances. And now they get some breaks from the NCAA, and USC is sitting where it is right now. So USC fans, college football fans, would love to hear what you have to say about this situation. You can attack it from a number of angles, but need you to join in right now on USC and Lane Kiffin right here on MarkRogersTV and ProFootballCentral.com.